It was a cold, rainy night in New York when our paths first crossed. I had been dancing at a small theater downtown, performing for an audience that only half acknowledged the beauty of the art form. Ballet isn't always celebrated as it should be. But there, amidst the dimming spotlight and the soft rhythm of my pirouettes, I saw him, Martin. He stood by the bar, guitar slung across his back, his wild hair falling just above his eyes, and his dark leather jacket clinging to his body like it was part of him. He wasn't like the other people who wandered through my world. He wasn't a choreographer, nor a fellow dancer. He was something else entirely, something raw, something alive. After the show, he approached me. I remember his words, his deep voice lingering in my mind. "You move like you're dancing with the soul of the music, Ashley." I could barely form a coherent sentence. Musicians rarely understood the depth of ballet, let alone recognize the connection between movement and music in such a profound way. We talked for hours that night. About our different worlds, about the sacrifices we made to pursue our art. And when he smiled, genuinely, not a practiced grin, I realized that this man was more than just a musician. He was the kind of person who made the air feel different when he spoke. By the end of the evening, we had exchanged numbers. That was the night I began falling in love. Weeks turned into months. Martin's band was on tour, but whenever they played in a city close enough, I would drive or fly out to see him perform. His energy on stage was intoxicating. The way he commanded the room, how his fingers effortlessly danced across the guitar strings as though they were an extension of his soul. It was mesmerizing. He would come to my rehearsals too, sitting quietly in the back, watching me dance with the same intensity. He never interfered with my work, but I could always feel his eyes on me, and in those moments, it felt like the world outside our bubble ceased to exist. I was falling deeper. But what scared me was how quickly it happened. I had always been guarded, so used to being independent. But Martin made me want to let go, to surrender to him in ways I had never allowed anyone to before. We married in a small ceremony on a beach in the Caribbean, just the two of us and a few close friends. Our vows were simple. No grand speeches, just two people who had found each other in the chaos of their respective worlds. I promised to stand by him, no matter where his music took him. He promised to never stop being the man who saw me. The real me. But we didn't know back then how hard it would be to keep those promises. Marriage doesn't fix things. It doesn't make the distance between us disappear, or the loneliness we both felt when the other wasn't around. But we tried. I joined him on tours when I could, performing between cities, carving out moments of normalcy in a life that was anything but. We built a rhythm, me, always performing, him, always performing. But we were still in love, still clinging to each other in ways that made the chaos feel like something we could manage. Still, there were cracks. Small ones at first. Late nights where he'd return from a gig, exhausted, while I was stretched across the floor, rehearsing for hours on end. He would tell me how the band had celebrated, how they had shared laughs. I would smile and nod, even as the sense of isolation began creeping in. But no one warned me about the complexities of being married to someone who lived a life that was constantly under a microscope. The world saw him as a star, and I was just his wife. By the time we hit our 6th year of marriage, we were seasoned in the art of maintaining a long-distance relationship. Martin would come home for a few days between tours, and I would squeeze in my own performances wherever I could. Our communication had to be perfect, constant. Phone calls, texts, FaceTime. But as time went on, those moments became fewer and further apart. He had become a star in his own right. His name was on billboards, on the covers of magazines, and his voice filled the airwaves. His fans adored him. And yet, something about that adoration began to eat away at me. Martin, with all his openness, was never one to hide his affections. He liked to embrace life, to connect with people in ways I wasn't always comfortable with. And that was the problem. I didn't know how to navigate the world of fame. I didn't know how to share him with the millions of people who adored him. We weren't just two artists anymore. We were two people lost in a whirlwind of expectations, each trying to hold on to who we were. Trust was always a difficult concept for me. It's not that I didn't trust Martin, but I couldn't help but feel the pull of insecurities every time a fan, a friend, or a fellow musician would flirt with him. He would smile, laugh, and engage, and I would smile through the discomfort, knowing that he wasn't doing anything wrong. But deep down, I felt like something was slipping. Martin was always open about everything, and he loved that I was so focused on my craft. But I could see it in his eyes sometimes, the way he looked at me, like he was waiting for me to open up more, to accept the life we had chosen. But the truth was, I didn't know how. His world was too different from mine, too open, too free. Mine was rigid, controlled, perfect in its discipline. I wasn't used to letting things go. I wasn't used to giving him the freedom he needed. By the time Natalie joined the band, everything felt like it was shifting in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. It wasn't just her arrival that threw me off, it was the way Martin spoke about her. "She's incredible, Ashley," he said one night as we sat on the couch in our apartment after a late rehearsal. His eyes shone with admiration, and I tried to smile, though something felt off in the way his words hung in the air. He wasn't just praising her talent, he was reveling in it. "She's going to bring something fresh to the band. You'll see." I nodded, though the words felt hollow. I wanted to be supportive. I did. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about her that had captivated him in a way I couldn't compete with. He'd always had a way of connecting with people, but this felt different. As the days passed, I noticed the little changes, like how Martin would bring up Natalie during every phone call, every conversation. There was always something new about her that fascinated him. She was quirky, she was a brilliant vocalist, she had this infectious energy that seemed to draw him in like a moth to a flame. And what stung even more was how I felt about it. I wasn't just jealous of Natalie in the way you might expect. It was deeper than that, it was an erosion of my own identity in his eyes. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I wasn't the one he seemed to turn to for support when things got tough. No, it was her. They spent hours in the studio together, working on music, rehearsing, laughing, things that used to be our thing. He would come home late, sometimes, and all I could do was lie in bed, waiting for him to tell me about his day. But his stories were always about the band, about Natalie's latest idea for a song, how they had clicked during rehearsal. He would always throw in a comment about how amazing she was, but he didn't seem to notice the effect it was having on me. One evening, I overheard them laughing together on the phone while I was in the other room, preparing for my own dance class. Their laughter echoed through the walls, carefree and easy. I hadn't heard Martin laugh like that in months, not with me. The thought of him sharing that kind of connection with someone else, someone who wasn't me, started to eat away at my self-confidence. Was I enough anymore? Was I still the woman he had fallen in love with, or had I become a distant memory to him, too caught up in my own world of ballet and perfection? It was late one night when the doubt crept in full force. Martin was out again, working late at the studio, and I sat at home, scrolling through social media, looking for something to distract me. That's when I saw a photo, a candid shot of Martin and Natalie together backstage. They were standing close, their heads leaning in toward each other, laughing. It looked innocent enough, but something in the way they were positioned, the warmth between them, it stung. I didn't tell him I'd seen it, but I couldn't shake the image from my mind. It played over and over again, like a loop of my worst fears. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it meant nothing. But deep down, I knew that something was changing, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. So, I withdrew further into myself, pretending I was fine while my mind spiraled. He couldn't see it, how could he? He was caught up in his own whirlwind of fame, of success, of everything he had worked so hard for. And I couldn't blame him for that. But I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us either. The cracks were small at first, hardly noticeable, but they were there. And with each passing day, I felt us drifting apart, while he seemed to float further and further into a world where I couldn't reach him. I told myself to be patient, that the unease I felt would pass. But I knew it wouldn't. And the more I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, the more I realized that the trust one once had in him, in us, was starting to erode, piece by piece. As the months went on, the doubt grew. Natalie and Martin were spending more and more time together, and I couldn't ignore the tension between them anymore. When I finally asked Martin about it, his answer was simple: "Ash, you're overthinking things. She's just a friend. We're just working together." But the way they interacted, I wasn't sure I could believe him. And what hurt the most was that I felt like I couldn't trust him the way I used to. I tried to bury it, to ignore it, but deep down, I knew something was happening. And I feared the worst. I feared that the man I had once loved so completely might not be the same anymore. I remember the night Martin left for the tour. It was late August. The air was thick with humidity, and the sun had just set behind the city skyline as he kissed me goodbye at the airport. I tried to smile, I really did, but the lump in my throat wouldn't go away. Every time he left, it felt like I was losing a part of myself. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just the usual sadness. There was a knot in my stomach, something I couldn't shake. He had promised it would only be 2 months. 2 months, and I'm back, he said, pulling me close one last time, his hands warm on my back. But I knew that nothing ever went according to plan in this life. Not for him. Not for me. I stayed behind, continuing my own rehearsals, burying myself in dance, trying to distract myself from the gnawing feeling that had settled in my chest. But as the days turned into weeks, I found myself staring at the phone, waiting for his call, waiting for him to tell me about his day, his concert, his life on the road. I wanted so desperately to be a part of it, but I wasn't. What bothered me even more than the distance, though, was the silence. Martin's calls had grown less frequent. His texts even more so. I didn't know why, but I felt him slipping away. And the more I thought about it, the more my mind began to wander. What was he doing when I wasn't there? Who was he with? Was he really just working, or was there something more going on that he wasn't telling me? Then, one night, my worst fears began to take root. I was in the middle of a rehearsal when my phone rang. It was him. "Hey, babe, how's everything going?" His voice was warm, but it didn't feel the same. There was an edge to it, like he was keeping something from me. "Good," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "I miss you, though. How's the tour?" It's fine. You know, the usual." He paused, then added, "I've been really busy. It's hard to find time to call, but I'll make sure I do better." "I miss you too." I wanted to believe him. I did. But something inside me told me it was too easy. There was too much in his tone that didn't match the words. It was 2 weeks later when I made the decision that would change everything. I had been following Martin's tour updates on social media, anything I could do to feel connected to him. His posts had become more cryptic, his captions less personal. And then, one evening, a friend of mine from the music industry reached out to me with a message. It was a photo, Martin with Natalie, laughing together in a hotel room. I don't know what came over me, but I didn't hesitate. I packed a bag, booked a flight, and within a few hours, I was standing in front of a hotel room door in Denver, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I thought I'd find. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a conversation. But as I stood there, I could hear laughter from inside the room. A woman's laugh, familiar, warm. And then, Martin's voice, softer than I'd ever heard it on the phone. I knocked, the sound loud and jarring in the silence of the hallway. The door swung open, and there they were. Martin, leaning casually against the doorframe, his eyes widening in surprise. But it wasn't just him. Natalie stood behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, a look of shock on her face. I couldn't breathe. My body trembled, but I refused to let it show. I stood there, staring at them, at the woman who had crossed a line I couldn't even begin to understand. "Ashley," Martin started, but I cut him off, my voice raw. "So this is what you've been doing, Martin?" I couldn't keep the tears from welling up. "Is this what happens when I'm not around? Is this how little I mean to you now?" Natalie stepped forward, her voice cold but steady. "We didn't mean for you to find out like this." "Don't," I snapped, holding up my hand to silence her. "This is not your place." The tension was thick in the room, and for a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. "Martin," I said, my voice trembling. "I trusted you. And you let me walk around thinking everything was fine while you're here, with her, in a hotel room. What was this? Just another casual fling?" His eyes flickered to Natalie, then back to me. "It's not like that, Ashley. It's not what you think. Then what is it, Martin? What else could it be? I was no longer in control of my emotions. You're my husband. You're supposed to be loyal to me. To us. Natalie moved forward again, her hand outstretched in an attempt to calm the situation, but I wasn't having it. Stay out of this. You don't get to act like this is some kind of misunderstanding. You know what's going on. I turned on my heel, my heart breaking with every step, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I returned to my hometown the next day. The place I had left so many years ago in search of something bigger, something more. But in that moment, I felt small. I felt broken. My life, the life I had built with Martin, was gone. The man I thought I knew, the man I had loved with all my heart, wasn't the person I had spent the last 6 years with. He had become someone else, someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had broken the most sacred vow we had made to each other. It wasn't easy coming back to my childhood home. The memories of my family, of growing up in a quiet little town, felt like a distant dream. But I needed this. I needed to rebuild. I found solace in teaching ballet again, in being surrounded by young, eager students who still believed in the beauty of art. They reminded me of who I was before the chaos of fame and love overtook me. It was 3 years later when I met someone new. Jonathan. He was a fellow artist, a painter who had been commissioned to create a mural in the local community center. He was kind, patient, and completely unbothered by my past. Slowly, I began to let go of the bitterness, of the pain that had consumed me for so long. We married quietly, just the two of us, with no grand gestures. We understood each other in a way I never thought possible. Then, when our son was born, I realized that there was more to life than the heartbreak and disappointment I had endured. I had come full circle. From the young woman who thought she knew everything about love, to the woman who had survived it. And now, to a mother, a wife, a teacher, a woman who had finally found peace. Martin's name no longer held any weight in my heart. He was a chapter of my past, a person I once thought I couldn't live without, but I had learned to breathe without him. I had learned that love wasn't about possession. It wasn't about holding on to someone who was slipping through your fingers. It was about letting go when the time came. And I had let go. Now, I look at my son, his eyes full of wonder and possibility, and I know that I have everything I need.